Hello, my name's Pam Moon, and I run an organisation called the Shroud of Turin exhibition, which features life-size replicas of the Shroud of Turin, which I bought from Barry Schwartz, who was the official photographer of the 1978 scientific examination of the Shroud. And the replicas show the Shroud in its life-sized form. So for instance, this one, you can see is 15 feet long. And it contains the image of a crucified man, his front and his back. So the cloth was wrapped around the body of the man. I personally believe that this is our Lord Jesus Christ, that this is a photograph of the burial cloth of Christ. But my point of my exhibition is to use the Bible to tell the story of the passion and the resurrection of Jesus, and to use the shroud as a visual aid. So that's what I'll try and do now. So yes, the cloth wrapped around the body, going behind the body and then over the top. And it's got lots and lots of different marks on it. So for instance, these are burns from a fire which almost destroyed the shroud in 1532. You can see that it matches here, these match. And that's a really interesting thing to start with. We wouldn't normally fold a painting or a picture in half because you damage it down the centre. But throughout its history, the shroud's been stored, folded, as you can see with these burn marks. And when you get it out, it isn't damaged in any way. So let's start with the Passion and what we can learn about the suffering of our Lord. Well, the first thing that we know he suffered was the agony in the garden, where we know that his sweat was like drops of blood that fell to the ground, the excruciating agony of knowing the road to the cross that he was going to walk. And then we learn from St. John that the servant of the high priest struck him in the face. Now, if you look carefully at the face of the man on the shroud, you can see it probably more clearly in a black and white negative. There's a huge bruise here to the right cheek, which is consistent with being struck. Now, the black and white negative is actually a photographic negative. In the olden days, when before digital imagery, you used to go into a dark room and you'd have a plate which reversed the light and dark of images. And the first image, a black and white photograph that was ever taken, was by a man called Secondo Pia. And when he saw the clarity of the face on the black and white negative, he almost dropped the plate. He was so astonished by it. But so here we see this beautiful face. Now, some of the scientists who've examined it have said things like, the body is very beaten up and yet the face is very serene. But even within the face, there's all forms of injuries that Jesus sustained. So we then learn that they put a crown of thorns on his head. Now, the crown of thorns you can see here, and the blood flows down the hair. You can see that there's long hair at one side of the longer than the other. But you can see the crown of thorns much more clearly on the back of the head of the man. You can see it's a really deep crown. Some people think it's a cap, but it's a really deep crown. If you look at it now, blood shows white on the black and white negative, but on the shroud itself, it shows red. Now, this image is not quite red enough. I've been privileged to see the real Shroud in Turin twice in my life, and the image is clearer and the blood is redder. But that's an extraordinary thing. How do you keep blood red? Generally, dried blood will oxidize and turn brown, but this remains red. It is an extraordinary thing. Here you can see the top of the head here with the hair, and you can see the back of the head here. I talk just for a moment about the fact that you can't see the image. There are only certain colours on the shroud. You can see the burns here. You can see the colour of the linen here. You can see the image, the faint image here, and you can see the blood. But we don't know the colour of his hair. We don't know the colour of his skin. We don't know the colour of his eyes. This is a universal image. It is colourblind as an image, which I find is a beautiful thing about the shroud. So he had a crown of thorns on his head. And then there's the words that are quite haunting, really. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, or scourged, we say. Now, what does that look like on the shroud? Well, it's most clear on the back of the man, and particularly on the black and white negative. So if you look from the shoulders here, going right down the backs of the legs, there are all sorts of marks which look like dumbbells. So a ball at one end and a bar in the middle. They're incredibly accurate, following, in fact, some scientists have argued that you can tell the height of the executioners by the angle that these landed on the body. And the Italian medics counted them up. There are hundreds of wounds that go all the way. And also, if you look here, under the right cheek here, this is another whiplash here. It looks like a semicircle, but it's actually a whiplash. There's another one across the eye. And the significance of that to me is that Jesus taught that if someone hits you on the right cheek, offer him the other. He's not talking about being weak in the face of evil. He's saying, be strong, but do not retaliate with violence. And this is someone who practiced what he preached. So then what other injuries? Well, if you look carefully at the shoulders of the man here, you can see there are different heights. This is a normal shoulder. This is a crease here, but this is the normal line of a shoulder. And this, Italian medics have argued, is radically dislocated. So severe, they thought, that it may have caused a right-sided paralysis. Now, also, if you look across the shoulders, you can see that the marks of the whip, which are clear on the back, are smudged across the shoulders, as if there was a heavy weight across the shoulders, rubbing, which is consistent with Jesus carrying his cross. There's a plait of long hair here, not a plait, a bound long hair. He had long hair down the back. The significance of the right shoulder is that Jesus appeared to St. Bernard, and he said to him that the greatest pain that he experienced, the most excruciating pain, other than the 5 major wounds, was his right shoulder. And there's a particular prayer of blessing that's associated with the right shoulder of Jesus. But I find the depth of the whiplashes to be extremely moving. There's an Old Testament passage which says, I offer my back to those who bruise my face and pluck my beard. Can you see here that the beard in the center is pulled? It's a sign of disgrace. People, it's a sign of humiliation to pluck the beard. So this Old Testament passage finds fulfillment in the face of Jesus. Look also at the nose here. Can you see that there's a deviated septum to the nose? This face is very badly assaulted, and yet it is very serene. Okay, so the next thing, they took Jesus and they crucified him. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us a great deal about crucifixion. We know from the resurrection appearances of Jesus that he showed his disciples his hands and his feet. And in Psalm 21, it talks, which is a psalm of crucifixion, it talks about they pierced my hands and my feet. This is where the blood flows from the nail to the hand here. And it's probably low down in the hand. A French physician called Pierre Barbet discovered that if you nail somebody further up here, it doesn't necessarily hold the weight of the body, of a body, but here it goes through and holds the weight, and that's very consistent. The blood flows down from the arms from there. And then if you look at the feet, now there's 2 different wounds to the feet. If we go back onto the shroud itself here you can see what it looks like, not in the black and white negative, but you can see the blood red here and falling down there. Now there's a wound to the front of the foot here, which is very consistent with what we would see in a crucifix image, that there's a nail through the front of the foot. This is very, very badly water damaged, partly from the fire and partly from another water staining, which took place, I would argue, much earlier in the shroud's history. But if you look down at the other end, you can also see the feet here. And there's a significance to this. You see a pool of blood in the foot, in the ball of the foot, where you'd expect it to come from the front. But there's also a pool that comes sideways from the heel. Now, the significance of that is that in 1968, they discovered the remains of someone who'd been crucified in Jerusalem. His name was Yohanan, and he had a nail sideways through his heel bone, exactly like this. Also in Cambridge, in England, in 2002, they found the same remains of someone who'd been crucified, a heel bone with a nail sideways through the heel. So he was pierced, his heel bone was pierced by nails potentially, and the front of his foot as well. There may have been multiple nails. Now, we then learn that Jesus had died, and they normally for crucifixion, in order to make sure someone is dead, you break the legs. And then you can't, to breathe in crucifixion, you have to keep lifting yourself up and down because the lungs collapse. And we know from the Gospels that when they went to Jesus, they found that he was dead and they didn't need to break his legs. There's no evidence of broken legs on the shroud. And they speared him in the side. Now, this is where the spear wound is here. This is the ellipse in which it entered, and it flows around here. And then it flows out across the back of the man here, in what's called the belt of blood. Now, the significance of it is that around all the blood stains, there's something that looks like a serum of plasma. And that's especially noticed around this. And you can see that there's a difference here between what looks like much, much lighter blood and much redder. And again, the significance of that is St. John said, out of his side flowed the water and the blood. You can see that on the shroud today. Now, Pope Francis said rather beautifully that the shroud invites us to go up to Calvary and to witness the passion. And he said, it is the face of one who is dead, and yet in the silence, he speaks to us. Now, we know that the man of the shroud is dead because there's no movement in the cloth. There's no movement around the mouth. There's no movement around the chest. So this is an image of one who is dead. And I think those are most of the passion. There's a few other little things to talk about. So, for instance, scientists discovered dirt on the soles of the feet. They discovered dirt on the knees, as though he had fallen on the way to the cross. And of course, in the Stations of the Cross, we remember Jesus falling on the road to the cross. They also found dirt on the tip of the nose, and maybe this caused the wound to his nose, that as he fell, his nose hit the ground. As you meditate on the shroud, it is either the greatest piece of art on earth, or it is the burial and the resurrection cloth of Jesus Christ. Those are your choices. It is either artwork that we can't begin to replicate today, or it is Jesus, and we are looking at the face of our Lord. Left just as an imprint. St. Paul talks about we see through a glass darkly, but then we will see face to face. So what causes the image to appear on the shroud? And I'm going to sort of now move on to some of the science that's been done. As I said earlier, Barry Schwartz was the official photographer of the science done in 1978. And there were scientists from all over the world, Italian, American, and they had 5 days with the shroud. And they were trying to answer the question, what creates the image? What creates the image? Is it a painting? And they did lots of different experiments to try and work that out. So, for instance, they looked under analysis. They took areas of the blood and they looked at it and examined it, and it is blood. They spent 3 years collating all their evidence, and then peer-reviewed it in peer-reviewed journals It is blood. It's AB blood group. It has various other attributes of blood that you would expect, like some DNA and hemoglobin. But it stays red, which is the mystery of the shroud. They shone a light through the number 3 blood stain on the forehead here, and discovered that the blood, you could see the blood, it had soaked into the image, but into the cloth, but the image disappeared. And at that point, they knew that this wasn't a painting, because you would see paint through a transmitted light photograph. So they knew it wasn't paint. And they tried lots and lots of other experiments. They discovered that it's not, they fluoresced it, and all the burns showed up beautifully in the fluorescent, the image disappeared. So they knew that it wasn't created by heat. It wasn't a scorch, it wasn't a photograph, it wasn't dye. They eliminated lots and lots and lots and lots of things. And Barry Schwartz will now say, we can tell you what it's not, but we can't tell you what it is. We can't tell you what creates the image. One of the scientists took fibers of it and looked at the depth in which the image penetrates the fibers of the cloth, and discovered that it penetrates to I think it's 0.0005 of a millimeter. That's measured in nanometers. And it's 15 feet across the surface. It just touches the surface of the cloth. It's about 1/10 of the diameter of a hair on your head. What creates that? What creates that? The current head of science at Turin is a man called Paolo de Lazzaro, and he spent 5 years working with ultraviolet lasers. So massive amounts of power for billionths of a second, a 40 billionth of a second. And he would argue that it was created by some form of light, that it was like a flashes of light for a 40 billionth of a second that created it. Too much length of time, and you blow the cloth up. But to just create that, and he's managed to colour change a tiny area of linen to give the same sort of properties, not all the properties, but some of the properties that the shroud has. He openly admits that even with the technology available today, we cannot make one of these. And he would argue that as a scientist, he can't say about resurrection. He can't make resurrection happen in a laboratory. But he wants to reopen the debate. What is this? It's certainly beyond the making of a medieval forger who didn't have ultraviolet lasers. Other scientists would say it's got a radiation phenomenon. It's like it's not. The image is formed parallel to gravity, so it's like a radiation phenomenon. We don't understand. We can't go back into the tomb of Christ and witness that wonderful moment of resurrection. But the shroud maybe is its witness. So what else is there? Well, there's another cloth. If you remember back to the stories of the tomb of Christ, when St. John went in and he saw the linen lying there, and he saw, he describes it as the napkin that was around Jesus' head.